This episode is going to be like an episode of Extreme Makeover because the model is about the same age. Welcome back to the Scale Builders Guild. Thanks again for watching. It's episode 21 of What's on the Bench Weekly. And if you're not familiar with What's on the Bench, it's where I take you through projects that are currently on the bench. And here's this one again. This Blazer just keeps popping up. I don't know why. Probably because it's one of my ultimate favorite trucks of all time. And today we're going to be doing a little bit of styrene work. This poor old thing has seen better days, and some of the bits and pieces are not as good as they should be. And certainly they were put together before styrene glue was a thing, I guess. Also, there is some significant body damage. There's a big crack in the hood. You can probably see that right down the center there. There's also just some weird stuff going on. So we're going to remove all the pieces, take it all apart, get that horribly painted driver out of there. And we're going to focus on cleaning this up and getting it ready for its ultimate end use, which will be on the Blazing Blazer. The panels itself are in pretty decent shape. It's not nearly as bad as you might think for its age. It is a little more fragile than I would like, but nothing we can't fix with a little styrene magic. And this isn't going to require a lot of effort, but let's try to go through this in a sort of step-by-step sort of process. Step one, it's filthy. So we're going to definitely clean it before we start doing any work, because when you clean something, you may actually find more issues that you can try to fix than you would if it were just left filthy like this. So let's get that driver out of there first of all. And why would you paint him like that? He looks terrible. All right, let's get that out of there, and we'll move on to the next step. Hopefully he was just screwed into place and not glued into place. Yeah, all right, sweet. I'm just gonna use warm water and a mild dish detergent to get all the grime off. I'll probably use a scrub brush and the same one that I use to clean all the dishes. So I'll be buying Rebecca a new scrub brush. Who am I kidding? I do all of the dishes. All right, let's go clean this body. Okay, all cleaned up. Like I said, just some warm water, mild dish soap is all you really need. I did give it a good scrub, so we got most of the real grime off of it. Now we're starting to see that it is, for its age, really in good shape. I removed all those tracing decals that Showdog had done originally. We won't be using any of these. I do have actual Coors decals on the way from the Showdog collection, so maybe we'll put those in a box as a keepsake of something he did. Yeah, the other thing, I won't be using this original wing or roof panel, whatever you want to call it. It's in pretty decent condition. There's only one major crack in it, but these were really well known for obliterating themselves on any kind of rollover. So there is a metal replacement that is also on the way. We'll be using that instead. So this will just go into the spares, or if I ever decide I want to go back to the original and just becomes a shelf queen, then we'll use that probably as well. But for the meantime, let's just focus on the main body. Okay, like I said, cosmetically it's pretty good. There's a few very minor scratches, just kind of rubbing along that edge there. Same thing on the front leading edge. The grill itself is in pretty decent shape. There's another bit of road rash there. This looks like it may have been a secondary grill used from another Blazing Blazer. We're going to remove that piece. I know I have a fresh, clean one on the way as well, so we'll use that instead. It'll be easier for us to get at fixing this big crack down the center as well. That's the major damage to this body, and that's really about it. You can see also there's some weird kind of divots in the hood here where the screws for that grill went in. And then, of course, there's all this extra glue that we're going to have to remove, because it looks like maybe that cracked at some point. We'll see how bad the damage is on that. Otherwise, it looks like it's in pretty decent shape. for what's like a 40-year-old body. Okay, so let's take that front grill off, and then we'll start investigating how we're gonna fix this crack. Where's my JIS bits? Do yourself a favor, if you are working with anything Tamiya, these JIS bits that I picked up on Amazon are the perfect choice. They are absolutely 100% essential because all the screws are not Phillips head, they're JIS, and they're slightly different. Different enough that you can easily strip them with Phillips head hardware. Okay, those came off pretty easy. Leave that man right down there. All right, excellent. Now let's investigate why all this glue was used, because man, they used a lot of it. It looks to me like the mounts had broken off entirely from the actual body, which is pretty annoying. See that right there? It looks like they used CA to try to glue those mounts back on. It wasn't Show Dog who did that, I can tell you that much. Let's see, is the other one in a similar state of disrepair? I'm gonna guess yes. There we go, yes. That one looks clean. That one looks like it's still attached, so that's really good. What we'll probably end up having to do here is sand out this whole area and then reapply that body mount with proper styrene glue, or MEK, so it actually makes a bond and stays on there. Now, what we're gonna do to fix that hood, let's get some supplies out, and I'll show you exactly what we'll do there. So to clean up pieces like this, or to fix broken parts, the best thing to do is to apply a nice thin strip of styrene along the inside of the body. Makes it a nice kind of like, it just kind of binds everything back together from the underside and gives you a nice clean finish to work with on the outside. Now, if you don't have, which you probably don't, if you don't have a big giant bin of styrene scraps, I do suggest getting some styrene and then putting it in a bin to create a bin of scraps. I'll be using some very thin, I've got a couple of different thicknesses here. There's some 020, which is nice and thin, that should work. I've also got some 010, which is really super thin. It's great for making letters on the back of tailgates, as you might have guessed. Yeah, let's start with that 020 and see how far that gets us. It's just used to sort of reinforce and give the styrene MEK glue or bonding agent something to actually kind of bond in and level up with. So let's get started. I'll cut some strips out of that piece right there, because it's scrap. You don't need perfect pieces for this process. It's really just about kind of like patching a hole, if you will. And I usually try to make it about like, I don't know, a centimeter thick. It depends on the actual width of the gap you're trying to fill, but a centimeter or so is usually enough. And I'll just cut a couple of pieces here from this one existing piece. And I'm just using the score and snap method. It's extremely easy. For the purposes of this little, you know, patch job, it doesn't need to be perfectly square, but you know, I do like things to be sort of fairly accurate. So there we go. And we can just trim all these pieces off. Snapping, score and snap method, very useful. And that's two good starting pieces that we use. More scraps there. We'll put those in the bin for later. Now, if this is still a good piece of styrene, this should hold up pretty well. What we're going to do is sand in here first to kind of remove some existing glue that they've tried to put down to repair that, and just give a nice smooth surface on which this can work. I made this sanding block. Well, I printed it actually. See, you can make that joke work for anything. And what we're going to do is just kind of lightly score that, smooth it out a bit. A nice sanding block is really super important, and I highly recommend investing in one or getting one printed, and it's a good way to work. That should be enough to give us a nice smooth base to work with, and we'll just kind of wipe away any of that dust. Nice clean surface to work with. There we go. And what we're going to do is we're just going to place these pieces here and kind of measure some distances just to give us some rough approximations of where things need to be trimmed. being very careful not to actually score or break the existing body, because this is pretty rare, as you might guess. And then we'll do the same thing for along here, but what we're going to do is we're going to build a bend into that end piece, and bending styrene is fairly easy. You can just use a round tool like this to kind of give you the contour that you're going to need. That should probably do it right there. Yep. And we'll just kind of press that into space, and as you can see, that pretty much is going to give us exactly what we need in terms of length. Cool. So let's get this first piece down, and I'm just using good old MEK cement. I keep it in this jar, surrounded by tires, so I don't knock it over on the table. But this came from Micromark. It's called Same Stuff. Professional plastic welder. It's just MEK in a different glass bottle. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use a couple different methods here. We're just going to lay down sort of a base coat on the actual body. We'll do the same thing on our piece of styrene. And without spending too much time there, we're just going to lightly press it down. Make sure it's sort of halfway between so the crack gets covered equally on both sides. We're going to hold it down on the reverse side as we press down on it. And now we're going to use the other method called capillary action, where you just kind of dab along the edge of your piece of styrene along the body, and capillary action forces that styrene glue into the cracks and into the actual two pieces to give a more firm bond. And you can see that it's going to be a pretty clean bond there. We can actually run a bead of MEK along that crack just to help get it into the crevices. And now we're going to apply the other piece on the other side. I recommend clamps. They're an excellent way to keep things in place. Now you'll notice I covered up the body hole. That's fine for now. I will go in later and re-drill that hole. Now, if you've never done styrene work before, and you have hard bodies that have damage, this is a great way to learn some of the process. It's not difficult to do this. Anyone can do it, and the results are pretty spectacular. Now, it looks pretty clean along there. We're going to run another little bit of MEK just along that joint, and we're going to let that sit, and we're going to let it bond. Usually styrene sets up pretty quickly, but in the case of this old body, I'm not sure how effective that's going to be. So we're going to leave that probably overnight before we try doing anything to it. If you want to know more about styrene construction, building with styrene, using styrene, anything styrene, check out this video up here. It gives you the basics and gives you a great place to start with styrene construction. One of my favorite techniques. With a crack this size, I think we'll probably need to do a little bit of body filling, but it won't be very much, and we'll use a two-part epoxy style filler rather than just using like a Bondo glazing putty, because it'll never work. But yeah, that's a really simple styrene fix. For the rest of it, like just some of these scuffs, I think we can probably get away with a 400 or 600 grit sandpaper to clean up some of those divots. So why don't we move on to that part next? I'm pretty chuffed that was really the only major body damage that I had to deal with. This other stuff is super easy. I've got some Tamiya foam-backed 400 grit sandpaper here. The foam I really like. It does contour quite nicely into areas. If you haven't yet, definitely watch Turks and Jerp's new video on sanding bodies. He goes through a lot of different ways of sanding, and they're all very effective. A couple of things to watch out for here. On this body, there are actual panel lines for where the doors would be. They're molded in there, and it's such a fine line that I am confident that if I did any sort of sanding in this area, I would ruin that body panel line. So we're going to stay far away from that. It's sort of key not to ruin these bodies. So just some light sanding with 400 grit. to get rid of some of those divots. It's almost like polishing out a scratch. That's basically what I'm doing. And I'm not going to go very hard or very deep. Some of the things I say on this show, honestly. This would be a good use case for some of that Bondo glazing putty, because that'll actually fill in these tiny little gaps. Now, there's a couple different ways you can apply like this glazing and spot putty. I like to use a piece of styrene actually that's been sort of like loosely sanded on one side, so it's got almost like a palette knife sort of application. And you do not need very much of this stuff, so let's see here. That's probably all we're going to need for probably the whole body. You want to act quickly with this. It can dry fairly quickly. Literally just fill the gap like so, and then leave it. Let it dry. That's it. If there's any more big gouges like that, there's another one back there. There we go. A few more little bits and pieces here. And this stuff works really well. It's very easy to see where it's gone and how it's going to fill a gap, for example. Like there's another scratch along there that, rather than sanding that out, can just be filled. And less is more with this sort of technique. You do not need a lot. And in fact, the less you use, the easier it'll be later on. And you have to sand it all off again. I'd love to know the history of how some of these things, how these vehicles, like how did it get to the point that it was built and then never run? That's what I want to know. Great. Okay, that pretty much covers it. All right, so once all that styrene is set and all of this Bondo glazing putty has dried, we can just hit it with some sandpaper. We'll start with 400 and move our way up to 1500 just to smooth everything out. Let's get that gap filling going now. This is Tamiya epoxy putty, and it comes as a two-part system. You get a green and a white. You cut off equal pieces of that, mix them together to create one solid color, and then you apply it to your body as a filler. It works really, really well. You don't need very much. A little goes a long way. They sell it in this big giant box, and it's primarily used probably for static models. So, a little bit goes an awful long way. I'll probably only use like that much. And that's probably too much, if I'm honest. And there we go. Just going to cut off another piece of the green. And it does come double-sided in plastic, so just remove that before you try starting to mix it together. And you can just use your hands to sort of knead it together to create one solid piece. And that'll take a couple minutes, depending on the temperature, of course. And this will harden very nicely. And it is sandable once it's hardened, so it is a really easy method for gap filling, especially something as small as this. It'll just instantly make it disappear, and then you've got a nice smooth surface on which you can prime and paint again. And it'll bond the two pieces together quite well too. Now I've kneaded it into a really small sort of worm, I guess you could call it, because we're not going to be needing very much to fill this minor gap. I'm probably going to try to even get it even thinner than this before we apply it into the body gap. But basically, that's what we're going to be doing right there. Just forming it into that crevice. We're going to make sure there's enough sort of surface area so that we can go back in and sand that later once that's cured. Okay, there we go. That's some very preliminary cleaning and sanding and fixing of this very vintage body. We've got that big gap there now completely filled with 2-part epoxy filler and reinforced with styrene along the bottom. We're going to need to fix that body post so we can get this whole grill assembly to work again. We just have to wait for this to cure, and then we'll sand that, and then body's in great shape ready for the next step. So there you go. That's some body work on What's on the Bench weekly. If you're enjoying this show, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, ring the notification bell so you get updates anytime there's a new video from the Scale Builders Guild. There will be a lot more to go. I still have to tear down the entire chassis of the Blazing Blazer, but I did want to do this first, just so I can say that I did it. There'll be lots more to come though. Hope you're enjoying it. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again next week.